What about Councillor DeAndrade? Is she joining us today?
Haven't heard. Haven't heard that she's not.
Okay, so according to my iPhone, it is now 3 o'clock. So I'd like to call this Planning and Development Committee meeting to order. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Kroll, Mayor Beamish, all in favor? Great, thank you. So we've got a few reports on our agenda today. The first one up is going to be given to us from our town planner, I'm going to say. It's on the development variance permit application for 308 Skyline Drive. So I believe that's Katie, right?
Hello.
Hello, Katie.
Are we ready?
Yes, we are ready. Over to you.
So the town of Gibsons has received a development variance permit application for the property at 308 Skyline Drive. This property is sited on a rock outcrop and it contains a very steep bluff. The property is currently undergoing a subdivision and the applicant has requested 2 variances on the proposed new lot in order to achieve a building footprint on the flattest portion of the lot and to also reduce the requirement for blasting. So the applicant has requested to vary the zoning bylaw to reduce the front setback from 7.5 meters to 2 meters, and a variance to the town's subdivision and development bylaw, number 1175, to allow for an overhead hydro and telecommunications connection. So staff have reviewed the variance requests in conjunction with Council Policy 3.9. It's been concluded that the variance request responds to site-specific limitations on the lot. The setback variance would result in a home being constructed approximately 9 meters from the edge of the asphalt. And the majority of homes in the neighborhood have overhead wiring already for hydro and telecommunications, and so the variance wouldn't appear to establish a precedent. Staff recommend moving forward with the neighbour notification to gather input for council consideration, and the recommendations are on page 1 of the staff report. The applicant, Jeremy Valeriot, is in the audience and is able to answer any of your questions.
Great, thanks, Katie. Okay, can I get a motion to receive the report, please? Councillor Kroll, Mayor Beamish, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, open for discussion.
It's just clarification that I understand that there is currently a single family home on the property, and that the property, when subdivided, will have a single family home and a vacant lot, which will also be able to support a single family home. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So Katie, I had one question about the map. I have to admit, I find the map very confusing to read, or the topo map, whatever it is. I can't even make out what I'm looking at, really, to be honest. It's hard to see where lot A.
Oh, okay, it's I think you might have to zoom in a bit. So the proposed building lot is defined.
This is where technology is difficult. Like, I wish you could just point to it.
I know, yeah. It's in figure 2 on the staff report. If you can zoom in, let's see here. So it's shown at the top of a very steep slope, and it's on proposed lot A, And there's a, the subdivision is delineated by like a dark black, well, it's got like a dotted line. Can you see that?
Not really.
It's the kind of that knife shaped thing at the top of the
Yeah, there's
the sword or knife.
yeah, there's a red line that might help first. There's two red lines, and that's your overhead wiring. And so the top red line is pointing to the proposed building site.
Don't think we have color, Katie.
Katie,
Oh,
if
you
you
No.
use your screen,
I don't know.
then you can use your cursor as a pointer.
Good idea. Let me see if I can do that.
Yeah, good point.
Chair Ludwig, are you using the second map or the first?
I'm looking at
Table
figure
2 on
There's a map,
page 6.
which is better, right?
Oh, yeah. If you use the attachment A, that's much better. Let's use that.
I had a problem as well. And then I found the attachment, yeah.
Let's see if I can share my screen.
I mean, generally, I'll just say while Katie's trying to share her screen, that this is, in my opinion, an appropriate use of a variance. The geography makes it difficult for us to follow the normal zoning and setback requirements, and that's exactly where a variance, I feel, should be applied. So far, I don't have any concerns with this. I just would like to understand a little bit better before I give my final vote on it.
Here we go.
Yeah, there, okay.
Okay, so here is, can you see my arrow?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the building, proposed building site here. Now, if I was to zoom, I'll zoom out slightly, if I can. Oh, goodness me. This line here, going up here, is the proposed subdivision line. So this would be your proposed lot B with your house and your garage. And lot A up here would be your new lot. So you would have your proposed building site in this corner. And as you can see, these contour lines here show that it's quite steep down here. And so this area with your contour lines, they're much further apart, and that means that it's more flat. So that's where the applicant is proposing to build their house. And these red lines here are your the proposed overhead wiring. So right now, I believe it's along this line here, and it would trespass for the current house, trespasses along the new lot. And so they would remove this and relocate the overhead wiring to the new lot and then one to the existing lot.
Okay.
Is that more clear now?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. So, Councillor DeAndrade.
Something that I had difficult to understand is because once the setbacks were 7.5 meters, right? The new setbacks proposed is 2 and still are 9 meters from the road. So why was the setback before set up at 7.5? Or I don't understand.
Because 9 meters from pavement.
And there's town easement probably in between.
Because 9 meters seems a pretty good distance, right, between a home and
So in front of every lot, there's an easement, or there generally is, right? Like either with a drainage ditch and power lines or whatnot. So in front of my property, there's, I don't know how many meters of town land between the road and my property.
also it is town land outside. Okay.
The standard road is 20 meters. So you may only have 10 meters of pavement or 7 meters of pavement, and you've got all that extra right away for telephone poles and ditch and everything else, sidewalks and stuff.
I've personally always felt for a long time that our front setback is too large, so I really don't have an issue with this. I have no problem with that aspect. It's a very 80s setback where the house is pulled way back off the street. And
It isn't until they want to run a gas line by your house or something, or you can go through that right away in front of you. Yeah.
So does anyone else have any comments on this application?
No, I'm good with it. I understand there's always challenges up in the bluff, and it's good to see actually a properly surveyed lot on the bluff, because most of them overlap and hard to find. So I would move the recommendation that recommend the development permit variance for Skyline at 308 Skyline.
Great. And Councillor Kroll is seconding that. Oh, Councillor DeAndrade, another comment?
Yeah, well, I think just given the terrain, I would feel more comfortable if the notifications were sent to 100-meter radius, because some people would, I don't know, they might have concerns to share. So how does council feel about that? I feel particularly that 50 meters is not enough, especially if the lots are big, right? You might be just notifying the front owners, not the back. So I would feel more comfortable to be 100 meters.
It's always 50 meters from property line, Councilor DeAndrade. So front, back, side, bottom, top.
And just a reminder that.
Yeah. Okay. But it's my opinion.
Does anyone want to second that? Are you making a motion? Oh, I'm getting the bell.
I'm sorry, you currently have a motion that's been moved and seconded.
Right, thank you. Is all in favor for the motion that's on the table?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Councillor DeAndrade,
I'll make a motion for the notifications to be 100 meters in this case.
Okay, does anyone want to second that? Looks like that one falls.
Okay.
I guess this seems to be always coming up. I know that 50 meters is set by the Local Government Act, as I recall. And we always seem to be coming and saying, well, we need more, twice as much. I think in this case, 100 meters probably doesn't make any difference, because it's, given the size of some of the lots up there. But it's something to think about. Maybe we should be looking at it in a general sense as to whether or not we want to look at notices to neighbors in all cases where notices are required, that they be 50 or 75 or 100, and take a look at that as a general policy, which we could do.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Kroll?
Just for clarification, I wasn't sort of really voting against Councillor DeAndrade's suggestion, but I think almost every single property on the bluff has been built with a variance because of the geography and the topography and just the nature of the area. So, in some cases, 100, the 100 meters would be, sending an invite out to the water because, of just of the nature of the thing, where the 100 meters, is going to have a bigger impact on a community. I certainly agree with her, but certainly up there, it's, I don't think it's as applicable as it would be in other areas if it was a sort of a flat, more densely populated area. So just for clarification on why I didn't support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor DeAndretti, do you want to make a motion
Yes,
regarding?
I would like to make a motion and bring the bylaw for revision because, I mean, we talk about community participation and in some case it matters. So, I mean, in this particular case, if it's the water, nobody will be sending notifications to the water. So it won't be applicable, but I think it gives the chance. I noticed in particular with the project here close in my neighborhood, like many people were like, even, I didn't get the letter, right? Because it was the RV. And so, I mean, obviously we cannot expand to 200 or something, but I find 50 not enough. So I would like to make a motion and bring for staff to bring report to council, bring back, and we pros and cons and of this legislation.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Beamish. We've got the Director of Planning would like to make a comment, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So it's our development procedures bylaw that requires a 50-meter neighbor notification. So we would, if you want to amend that, we could bring back a bylaw amendment to increase that number. So to whatever distance you propose. So 100 meters or 75 meters or.
I think in the sense of it, it could be the implications of it as well. You know, what does it mean to change it? And yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Kroll?
I was also going to ask, so we're going to, just to clarify, we're going to get a report back on increasing it to 100 meters and what the implications to staff would be and the additional costs involved with doing that, because there are going to be costs, both staff time, sending out the thing, researching the properties that are applicable. So it's not just, you know, I appreciate the transparency thing of it, but it also is going to be staff time and the additional cost involved. And I think we need to be reflective of that.
Okay, Councillor DeAndretti, and then we should make a final vote on that motion and then move on.
Yes, obviously I'm sensitive to cost and I understand more work, but we also have the policy of community engagement. So it's balancing these forces. But I would be also curious if possible, like the comparison with other municipalities, right? What they do in this case, right? If are we the only one with 50 or everybody does 50? So I think it will help.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. It's been seconded by Mayor Beamish. Is everyone in favor of having a review of that bylaw?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next report. I'd also like to say hi to Jeremy if he's out there somewhere. Hi, Jeremy. Okay, sorry, just pulling it up here. Okay, so the next report we have. Sorry, my internet is slow. Can't wait till we're meeting in person again.
Yeah.
Kids are back in school. First day back today for my kids.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, guys, it's just not opening. Okay. Okay, so we have another report from our town planner, Katie Thomas. And it's regarding, oh, it's, hold on. Sorry, technical difficulties. And now there's a spider that's coming in front of my screen. Development permit application process. How do I read? Sorry. My technical difficulties. Regarding the development permit application process for the aquifer protection, geotechnically hazard and environmentally sensitive area. So go ahead, Katie.
Okay, thank you very much. So planning staff were directed to prepare a report for council outlining the current process for development permits 1, 2, and 9 on March 3rd. So this staff report has been prepared for information, and I'll provide you with a really quick overview of the staff report. So this report looks specifically at procedures in place for the development permits pertaining to environmental site conditions. So DPA 1 looks at geotechnical hazard areas where professional geotechnical assessment and specific development standards are required to reduce the risk of life and to property from geotechnical hazard. The development permit area guidelines apply to all of the parcels, whether they're partially or entirely within development permit area number 1. And these are outlined in Schedule C of the OCP. DPA 2 pertains to environmentally sensitive areas, which would include riparian areas or, say, the dryland forest. And the objective of DPA 2 is to protect and preserve natural assets from development. And these areas are outlined in Schedule B of the OCP. Oh, sorry, Schedule D. DPA number 9 looks specifically at the Gibsons Aquifer. And this DPA is based on the 2013 Gibsons Aquifer mapping study, which was completed by Waterline Resources. The DPA 9 works in tandem with the provisions of the town's water regulation bylaw, which is aimed at protecting the Gibsons Aquifer. And these areas are outlined in Schedule F of the OCP. So all properties within these development permit areas require a development permit to be issued prior to either subdivision approval, construction of a building or structure, and these would include additions or alterations, and the alteration of land, and that would include the removal of vegetation or grading for properties within those DPA areas. The Town of Gibsons Development Permit Delegation Authority Bylaw, number 1054, delegates the Director of Planning to issue development permits for DPAs 1, 2, and 9, unless permits are applied for retroactively or where significant enhancements are being proposed by the environmental professional. For DPA 9 permits, the Development Director of Infrastructure Services also reviews and signs off with the Director of Planning once they're both satisfied that the project meets the guidelines and conditions for the development permit area and the water regulation bylaw. So DPAs 1, 2, and 9 all run through a similar process for review. All of the reports for a DP must be signed and stamped by a qualified professional that's in good standing with their respective accreditation affiliation. And planning staff review these reports in line with the development permit area guidelines and ensure that the reports cover the work proposed for the building permit. Each qualified professional has specific regulations that they must abide by. For example, an assessment to a streamside setback falls under the provincial riparian regulations, and therefore the method and assessment is filed electronically with the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development for review before being reviewed by the town. Once approved, the conditions of the development permit are binding on both the town and the existing and future owners of the property. The development permit area numbers 1 and 2 are registered with the Land Titles Office, and they appear on the title of the property and are kept on record at Town Hall. DPA 9s aren't registered on title, as these are specific to an area of excavation and time frame, and therefore an construction project might require more than one DPA 9 for a project. But DPA 9s are kept on record at Town Hall. A development permit has a 24-month time period for work to commence before a DP expires. If applicants aren't able to commence work within this time frame, then an extension can be applied for, subject to the qualified professional confirming that the reports that were previously submitted and the recommendations and mitigation measures are still valid. In terms of peer reviews, DPA 9 works in tandem with the Town of Gibsons water regulation bylaw in order to protect the Gibsons aquifer. And so should proposed works involve drilling within the lower Gibsons area and have possible interference with the Gibsons aquifer, there's a specific section, section 7.2.4 of the bylaw, that allows for staff to send the report and the proposed drilling program for review by another qualified professional hydrogeologist. And this is at the cost of the applicant. Staff then automatically send such drilling programs in the lower Gibsons sub-area to Waterline for review. DPA 1 and 2 aren't usually sent for peer reviews, and they are only requested for peer review if there was evidence to suggest that the report required input from an additional source. So there's not a not so brief overview for you.
All right, thank you, Katie. Motion to receive the report, please. Councillor Kroll, Mayor Beamish, all in favor? Great. Do we want to have some discussion about this? Yes, Mayor Beamish?
Yeah, I guess I'm reading it. I mean, I appreciate reading this. It actually was a good opportunity to read the material. Probably should have read it a while back in the context of different things, but I was looking at the permit area number 1 and permit area number 2 relative to peer review. And I did look at some other documents online, and one that I came across was a professional practice guidelines for flood mapping in British Columbia. And under their qualified professional requirements there, one of the requirements for the qualified professional is to consider the need for independent peer review. And we do have the requirement for a qualified professional to prepare a report, but we don't have that as a requirement that they actually consider the need for a peer review and report on that within the report. Whether a peer review should or should not be done is one of their findings, one of the results. And it talks further in that same document about the independent review and being an additional level of review beyond the minimum requirements that may be undertaken for a variety of reasons by an independent member not previously involved in the project, at the discretion of the qualified professional, and in consultation with the viewers involved in the regular checking review process. Alternatively, the authority of client may request an independent external review to support the project approval. And I think that's one of those areas that we're constantly having to defend our decisions on. And I think we could be a little bit more focused or strong on it in the context of those permit areas, saying that at least considering whether or not a peer review would be beneficial. So that would be a question that have to be answered and not ignored by the qualified professional or by the planner, should this document be peer reviewed and as part of the process and part of the requirements of the permit, considering the peer review process. So that's one comment I have on peer review. I just let council comment back on that.
Thank you. Councillor DeAndrade?
Just a clarification, Mayor Beamish. So the professional would say whether the peer review would be warranted or no, but this will be a second person, an independent?
Be a second independent person with the same qualifications.
Oh, okay.
Look at it, sort of thing. So they'd have to address that, what the benefits of a peer review would be, or what aspect. And in some case, they might say that this is a new area of technology, and it might benefit from a peer review. And secondly, also the client, being ourselves, could ask for a peer review as well, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But we're silent on it in the document. That's all I say, is that we address it more formally further on in DPA 9, but we don't address it in the other DPAs. And I think it should just be something that should be part of the process. Should we do a peer review? Yes, no. If no, why not? Or if yes, why, sort of thing. And it's one of those steps. So we have addressed that thought.
Comments on this? Okay, and are we wanting to go anywhere with this report?
Well, right now it's here for our information, but I think it's also an opportunity for us to kind of recommend or suggest amendments to the documents and ask staff to review it further. You know, as I say, I'd happily pass on this document that I have from the professional practice guidelines for flood mapping in British Columbia, which underqualified professionals are required to consider whether a peer review should be undertaken. And I just think it's something that we seem to be always addressing that, either among ourselves or with the public. And I think it's good that we anticipate it.
So I support, sorry, Councillor D'Andretti, I support what you're saying, Mayor Beamish. I'm just wondering how to move this forward, or move that question and discussion forward to council.
I have a proposal. I know we have been talking about the formation of the Environmental and Climate Change Committee. I think this is a wonderful project, the first project to start. I think it is important because this conversation about revising the DPAs, I think is a good one, you know, in face of climate change. And also even in face of big projects, when you have all these DPAs, and sometimes, for example, a DPA 5 is approved, but there's still other DPAs, and now it has been amended. And now there's other DPAs in questions, things that have not been necessarily resolved. So I think integrating everything, I think for the majority, the policy obviously is good, but I think, so my suggestion is that we make a motion to bring to perhaps a first project for the Environment Committee.
Okay, Councillor Kroll, are you seconding that? Or
Don't we have to receive the report before we can make a motion on it?
did we not? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we did. We did.
Yeah.
So we've already done it.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Whew.
Yeah.
Councillor Kroll, were you seconding?
I'll second it then.
Okay. I think that's an appropriate first project for the environment.
You're going to ask, where's the committee?
That's it.
We have to form, and I already brought the terms of reference. I believe you can talk about it.
Yeah, the Council D'Andrade has provided a draft terms of reference that I have had a look at, and the CAO is looking at right now. And I think it is timely that they will move forward with that committee. There are some other things on that committee too, some other big projects such as the climate action plan and things of that nature. So that I think those are important. But I think this is one that keeps coming back to us. And I think it's important. It's obviously important to the community. And it's at one other level of consultation and transparency. And I think that is something we could do better on. But we don't have to make the amendment right now. We could say that you know, it is a project that is on our radar in that context.
Well, we have a motion that's been seconded now to bring it to that committee when that committee finalized. So does everyone want to vote on that?
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Okay. Great. Good. Move that along. Okay, so moving down to our.
No, I have another point.
Oh.
That was just my first point.
Oh.
I'd like to look at bylaw 1054, which is the delegation bylaw. And again, it's something I think we can talk about. You know, I'm going to come back to the increase in community engagement and transparency in the delegation bylaw, which was appropriately delegated. I mean, it's appropriate that council delegates activities and decision making to staff. One of the problems with it, though, is it sometimes takes it out of the public eye. And so that once it leaves council chambers and it delegated to staff, very often these issues are not seen again clearly until a permit's been issued. So that under section 3 of the delegation bylaw, page 35, it says the decision of the director of planning may be reconsidered by council upon written request from the person subject to the decision. So that the person subject to the decision, in other words, the applicant, has the right to request a review. Presumably that would be done if the review was not in his favor, or his or her favor. And then the director of planning must make note of this right of reconsideration, provided notice. But I also had a thought that is, what if prior to the issuance of a development permit and the town receives an applicant in writing and with reasons from a member of the public that the development permit council may direct the director of planning to undertake such a review. In other words, it allows other people to say, well, yeah, wait a minute, what about this? And maybe in that particular case, we would have to have a fee associated with that, just so it's not just you get anybody and everybody can say, well, I don't like what you're saying, I want a review of that to continue a process. But maybe they'd have to kind of say, okay, that for an application fee put forward, but at least it's an opportunity for a third party to request a review of a development permit, so that we're not dealing with these continually in the past, but we're also saying that you know, it's an open process, transparent process. Development permit is going to be issued there. Here's the terms of it, and somebody might suggest a review. And council doesn't have to agree to that, because the person would have to provide specified reasons in writing as to why they feel a review is necessary. And that could be responded to again by staff or the qualified professional. And looking at it, this leaves that opportunity. So there's not just the applicant who has the right to request a review, presumably where the permit is not going to be issued, but it does give a right to request a review in the case where a permit is going to be issued. So I just throw that up for discussion.
Okay, I saw CAO had his camera on. Would you like to make a comment on this?
Yeah, just if I may, just to Charlotte, from clarification, in the bylaw, the applicants, the town, and the professional sort of have a relationship, and there's you know, responsibilities assumed on either part. So I'm just trying to understand what is the role of, you know, person next door. So I'm trying to understand, are they appealing the decision of staff, or are they just ordering a peer review, and what responsibility they take for that? So they'll say they'll pay a fee to review a permit that's been issued. Isn't that sort of the role of council in some ways? Or?
Well, having the right to request it, having the right to come forward and say that requesting a review of the development permit or aspects of the development permit as it may affect them, but they'd have to provide specific reasons why they would ask for that, and those reasons would have to be considered and either agreed with or rejected in some sense. But it's just one of those thoughts as to, you know, it seems to be again one of those areas where we're always in controversy with the public. Well, let's let the public put up and say, okay, yeah, if you feel a review is necessary at this time of this document, yeah, we would be prepared to consider that.
Okay. 1 second, CAO. Councillor Kroll, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Now, is this all? Because in the development application process, does it not, you know, there is an opportunity when it goes to, you know, to public notification and often public hearings. So where does this additional thing come in? Because earlier in the process, there was that opportunity. You know, so is this for someone who wasn't around when the other stuff was held and they've suddenly parachute back into town and you know, want a review of everything because they weren't here at the time it was reviewed?
Well,
Or
that's a question I'd have to the planner to see, do all development permits go through a public process of an open public process for where they are reviewed?
Can I just check in with the CEO? Did you want to make a comment before the Director of Planning?
No, thank you.
All right, Director of Planning then.
Thank you, Chair. So the DPA 1, 2, and 9 are very technical development permits. So, for example, I'll use DPA, the riparian development permit area. There are provincial regulations around identifying a streamside and protection and enhancement area. And we rely on those professionals, so the registered professional biologist, for example, to come up with what that setback should be. And we take the recommendation from the professional. They have their professional standards that they must abide by, and they also must meet the provincial regulations. So in a case where somebody wants to build a shed on the back of their property, it could be a 10 by 10 shed that doesn't need a building permit, but if it's in a development permit area, they still need to get a development permit. And the process is they would hire a professional, get that report, it would go through the provincial provincial process, and then we'd get notification that it's been received and approved by the province, and then we'd issue the permit. So the requirements are very technical. And therefore we would rely on the professional to come up with that. In the case of a geotechnical development permit, if there's a identified flood area, we would rely on the professional engineer to come up with the appropriate flood construction level and appropriate setback or measures to protect the development from flood. In the case of the aquifer, again, we rely on the professional. So there are specific standards that must be met. In the case of a form and character development permit, that is more subjective, and that comes to the Planning and Development Committee and then Council for a decision before they can get a building permit. So the process is much longer when we bring it to Council and the Planning Committee. It's open to more feedback. So if the discussion is looking at getting a peer review, that adds time, that adds a cost, and it applies to all development in development permit areas. So that's something the committee should consider. It would have a pretty substantial impact on development in the town if we brought these technical permits to PDC and then Council, and it could cause quite a delay.
Well, there are cases, many cases, in where council would not see or the public would not see a development permit before it's issued.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And a building permit.
Yeah.
They are technical. They must meet code. They must meet standard.
Yeah, that seems to be most of the time, most of the area that we receive criticism on or controversy on after the fact then. And I'm just wondering if before the fact, that if it's going to be an area that is controversial before the fact, that here's the report, and we ask in that case the qualified professional whether or not what their recommendation is relative to peer review is one of the questions we would ask them. But also staff could ask for a peer review. It doesn't come back to council, so we wouldn't necessarily see it. But it's one of the areas we seem to run into the most kind of council staff public conflict on. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to work with that and say, okay, well, one of the areas would be that they would be kind of that public opportunity, that if the public at that certain point came forward and said, you know, we have reasons for these following reasons. We recommend a peer review, a further review of this document be done. Should we anticipate that rather than defend against it? That's all I'm saying.
Can I just interject here as chair? I just want to make sure I understand what we're discussing. We're talking, you're questioning whether or not we should provide an opportunity for the registered professional biologists or hydrologist, or whoever does the analysis, that their report for the DP is peer reviewed by another professional. Is that what we're discussing? Or
it's one way. It's just how do we get to that point process? If for example, if the report comes forward to the planner and recommends the project not proceed, okay, then the applicant has a right to appeal that decision to council under the area of delegated authority. But there's no provision for a member of the public to look at a project that's going to proceed to say, well, yeah, but wait a minute, have you looked at this or did you consider that? And ask that that be reviewed by council.
but what would their
they'd have to give reasons. And I don't know what those reasons would be, but they'd have to give reasons. And you know, I think that we have some very astute members of our community, either individually or through association. The Conservation Society, for example, they might have a different perspective on a location that may not have been considered. But they say, you know, but have you looked at this, or did your people look at that? And as I say, we're always seem to be fighting the action after the fact, as opposed to trying to make it easier for a project to move forward by getting those considerations out of the way at the time the decisions are made.
So my one concern with this approach, and I take the Director of Planning's comments, you know, to mind. I'm not sure, and maybe the Director of Planning could speak to this, how often we do run into this issue. I know we've run into this issue significantly on 1 to 2 projects that we all know about, but I don't know how often 3. I guess, okay, 3, you're right, okay. All right.
And they're always going to be major projects. They're always going to be those projects. And the routine ones, like the garage in the backyard, is probably not going to create that same level of angst or interest. But it's always going to be a major project. It's going to stimulate that kind of attention.
Councillor DeAndrade?
Maybe Michelle, I really appreciate, because I understand that, I mean, people obviously, staff perceive this as more work, totally understandable. And when we give a chance for people to participate, there's more things that come towards, right? And it could be more work, it could be more communication. But I think it is important when, especially areas that have several values. For example, the harbor is one of them. You have high economic value, but you also have high environmental value, high social value. And the moment that we allow just one specific professional to give a perspective of this place, we are narrowing. And I think Mayor Beamish is right in this place. So we would have a little bit, maybe for a project like that, maybe there will be an initial delay, but once we understand the concerns of the community, first people would perceive that this is legitimate because we haven't approved anything. And, you know, we need to trust people because people have wisdom. And I think that's one thing that we rely obviously in professionals for you know, this kind of technical decisions, but we need to start trusting our community as well. And I think this really could be a remedy. You know, we understand, we don't know exactly how exactly we can do, but I love the idea of opening for discussion, and that could be another project for the environmental committee or things like that, you know, to have this. But I think this is really important, especially that we are facing, whether we like it or not, inequality is highest. And it's inequality in every single phase. It's social, it's financial, and health. I mean, there's so much inequalities. And I think that's good governance.
So Mayor Beamish, are we making another motion for the environmental committee then?
Yeah, I'm not asking it to be resolved now. I'd like to have that conversation, and I'd like to see what the negatives of it are. I think that, where it popped in my mind is a reading number 3 of this. If you go back and read on that permit, it says the decision of the director of planning may be reconsidered by council upon written request of the person subject to the decision. Well, in some cases, we're all subject to the decision, whether it's a decision to proceed or a decision not to proceed. And in that case, and I tried to put myself in that and say, yeah, but what's my recourse as a neighbor or as a member of the public to ask for that reconsideration or review of that process? So that's one thing that I'd like to see what the best practices are in this area, and what the downfall of it would be. And I'm certainly prepared for that car. And I'm not saying I should get a free ride, just because I appreciate the challenge to staff if every person every week came in with another reason why this should be reconsidered. The project would never go ahead. That's why I think there should maybe be kind of an application fee associated with that, so that and it could be an application fee such as we have in some cases, that if what you're saying has made sense or gets returned to you, I don't know, but at least you've got to kind of move forward. I'm certainly happy to have that conversation in the future. I just didn't want to pass the opportunity by here.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crowell.
I certainly appreciate where Mayor Beamish is coming from with respect to this. I'd like to hear from the professionals who have to deal with this from the other side of the desk. What sort of impact they might see that it might be on projects that they're potentially bringing forward. I think where there is the opportunity, and I think something that's become blatantly apparent with projects in the past, is that things happened that the community was or was not aware of. And I think through the development process, I think it behooves the town to we realize how important communication is. The regional district board are they're constantly being besieged because they have an incredible lack of communication, and they're aware of it, and they're trying to get a communication officer. So I recommend that we really hang on to Elizabeth. But communication as the project is moving forward, I think, is more productive and constructive than waiting to a point of offering a permit and then saying, oh, well, wait a minute, we need to rediscuss this again. I think the communication needs to be continuous and ongoing through the project and not a stopgap. But I would certainly like some feedback from our professionals on this committee.
I agree. All right, Cliff.
Sorry, just had to find my unmute button there. The nature of my work is that it's pretty cut and dried, straightforward. So I have very little cause to have a second opinion given on work I've done. When it's ever happened, I mean, I think I can speak for almost any professional, usually welcome it. I mean, it's a very friendly, collaborative process for the most part. I mean, unless it's a legal battle. So professionals are that way, right? It's usually you're dealing in facts. I think though, Councillor Ladwig sort of pinpointed something, is that we're talking about probably a process for a small amount of very controversial projects. And I think the nature of the technical reports we're getting, they're much more opinion reports. When we're talking about things like puncturing the aquifer, it's people can't really say for sure exactly what's going to happen, so they're offering their best opinion as a professional. And I'm sure if you read the small print in report, they're going to qualify all of that very clearly and take just no responsibility beyond saying, like, here's what we think is our best guess of what will happen. So if what you're looking for is a report to find the contrary to that, you can probably find one. And that's the kind of battle I would be just leery of facilitating. If you end up at loggerheads with this professional says this professional says this. They're just professional opinions. Neither can kind of contradict the other because they're saying their best guess. And I think that's what you're going to end up with in this small number of circumstances where you're talking about controversial projects. Like I say, I think sort of almost everything cut and dried is going to be cut and dried and clear. And then the small number of cases that aren't, it's probably going to be very difficult to resolve by just having a review or a second opinion or something like that. So, I mean, those are my thoughts on the matter. I don't know that I can offer any sort of way of resolving that, except that I think it's probably mostly a political process. And on that, I don't have any sort of sophisticated opinions.
That was very valuable. Thank you. Thanks, Cliff. Scott, did I see your hand up?
No.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for my work, I really kind of focus on the form and character. That's kind of where I'm strong at and where architects are strong at. And on the daily course of my job, I hire other sub-consultants to provide me with technical advice. So I hire structural engineers and geotechnical engineers and environmental engineers, and then I use their information to best form my opinion on how a building could be put together. I certainly hear what Cliff is saying, and I agree that ultimately a decision has to be a political decision, because you'll start to open the doors to multiple opinions, and then whose opinion do you take? A friend in Vancouver was part of a co-op housing with 27 other units, and they needed an envelope assessment on the building, and they weren't happy with that. So let's get another assessment from another engineer, and maybe their advice is better. And so they end up kicking the decision down the road and delaying it because they're waiting for the advice that they want to hear versus the advice that they need or what's accurate. And so I think there is a danger of opening the door to multiple interpretations of a particular profession and engineering. And there's so many gray areas, even with the technical engineers, that you can kind of, in a way, you can sort of sway the way that you provide the advice depending on who's hiring you. So I think that it's important to get as many opinions as possible for every major infrastructure project or kind of a hot button issue project like the George, but you've got to be careful on how far you open the door and that's why I think ultimately it does become political at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I mean, it's a very interesting discussion, and I think it warrants further discussion. So I do like the idea of us, if it's going to go to the environmental committee, but I do think that it requires more review than the small discussion that we've had here today, because I do think the ramifications are significant on both sides, and I think we should understand what they are. So Mayor Beamisher, would you like to make a motion that this topic be reviewed as well through the environmental committee and that they provide recommendation? No?
Yes. Yeah. I'm prepared to do that. Yes, I'll make that recommendation.
Okay. Councillor DeAndre, do you want to make a comment before?
Well, I can accept. I was thinking this is not necessarily an environmental issue necessarily, so it doesn't need necessarily to come. But if the platform is, it could be even in a planning and development, another perspective or something. I don't think it's necessarily an environmental issue in this particular. I mean, many times it is, because that's how our society has been, right? Pushing development. And the economy always number first, and the environment. So people feel this unbalanced. And we don't need to have a discussion on that, because look where we are in time, with all the crisis. But I'm happy if it's in the community. But I was just thinking this could be even, I like the idea of expanding and seeing if we have a better way of doing business.
What's funny, you've just converted me. I actually now think it would be better back in the Planning and Development Committee, to be honest. So, but before we, does anyone want to, Councillor Kroll, I saw your hand up. Do you want to second Mayor Beamish's?
Well, I just wanted a clarification. Is this with respect to development permits 1, 2, and 9, or all DPs?
No, it's development permits with delegated authority permits. They don't come back to council.
Does somebody want to second Mayor Beamish's motion?
I can second. I'll second.
Yeah, I'm not going to support it simply because I think it should come back to the Planning and Development Committee. So I'm but all in favor. If you,
Well, I'm fine. I'm happy to amend it to come back to the planning and development versus to the environment committee. I'm fine to amend it to that if seconder's okay with that.
seconder, are you okay with that?
Second the amendment.
The amendment? Okay, great. Councilor Dan.
Maybe just a curiosity, is it possible that the committee, the planning and development invite people? I mean, obviously there has to, a lot of the issues we have is it regard environmental issues. I just didn't want to make necessary just an environmental issue and then leave the other people apart. I think I would like just to have a conversation, but is it possible? And I know that Cliff has environmental background, but I'm just wondering if we can bring other environmental organizations to the discussion.
Well, I guess because this bylaw 1054 relates to the issuance of Gibsons aquifer development permits, geotechnical hazard area development permits, and environmentally sensitive area development permits, that's what this relates to. It doesn't relate to form of character permits or stuff like that. So it just relates to those. Well, it does relate to signage in commercial industrial areas, which is they're not as controversial. It's limited in scope as to on the delegated authority, and the majority of that scope are environmental issues.
I still think the implications from a planning and development perspective.
I have no problem with it coming back. It's a good discussion to have. It's one we haven't had, and we have good to do. Yeah.
Corporate officer, I see you had your hand up.
Yes, if somebody could please read back the motion that you're currently debating, because I think it's become a little bit muddled.
So the original motion was to refer the question of additional reviews under the development under bylaw 1054 to the environmental committee once it's established. But I would welcome friendly motion if Councilor D'Andrade, who seconded it, to make that the Planning and Development Committee instead of the Environmental Committee.
Can we bring people to add to this committee, just like our guests with environmental background, with their perspective, to enrich the conversation?
I don't think so.
No.
That's,
Yeah.
We would have a special workshop or something. We'd hold a different forum.
Oh, sorry, it almost, I shoot myself on the foot. I think I was trying to be inclusive. I didn't want to bring to the other side. So respect that it's not necessarily just an environmental issue, because obviously you have other implications. But obviously, I would like to include that, like, people in the environmental. So I would perhaps, if the committee agrees, that we have initial discussion at the environmental level, and then we bring to because it's the committee is not a decision maker anyways, then we bring further for the planning and development with some rationale build up in this regard.
Well, without knowing how the terms of reference for this environmental committee is looking, I am hesitant to think that, I take it there's going to be staff time spent on this environmental committee, is there? So you're going to take staff time discussing it through the environmental committee, then we're going to take staff time discussing it through the planning and development committee, then we're going to take staff time probably making a decision on it at council. I'm hesitant to do that. So I think, so make a decision, guys, planning or development committee or environmental committee, either way, we're discussing it somewhere.
Okay, I think we just have to consider that in projects, in controversial projects, staff has spent lots of time anyways. Since this is something that will be, to a certain extent, changing the bylaw perhaps with other implications that we don't understand, I think it's warranted a discussion. But if we have to choose between, then I'll choose the environmental, because I think it's important that people with environmental perspective participate in this discussion. It doesn't make sense just to be at this level, right? Or just, you know, I think we have to hear from other groups. So, okay, so Mayor Beamish initial, and we go from there.
Okay, so all in favor of sending this recommendation to the Environmental Committee? Oh, sorry, Corporate Officer. You're mute or something. I can't hear you. I can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm on a computer I'm not usually using. Can I just get the wording of the motion? Are you specifically looking at delegated DPs only? And you would like them sent for review for opportunities to include further public consultation?
Yeah, I have some words here, but it would be a opportunity, amending the bylaw 1054 to 3, to add a C in that, and be prior to the issuance of a development permit. An applicant, they give an application for review could be received from the public. Basically that.
An application
For review of the development permit could be, for further review of the development could be received from the public. How we do that?
by the public, to be by the public and received by.
Be reviewed. And then it could be further to,
Did you get that, Corporate Officer?
Yes, so a delegated DP, a way for a delegated DP to be received by the public.
Yeah, reviewed by the public, yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing a number of hands. Okay, one more comment from Councillor Kroll, the Director of Planning, and then I want to wrap this up.
Mayor Beamish had mentioned earlier, with good cause and a fee associated to cover appropriate costs.
Yeah, and I think that's all part of the detail that would come out in terms of discussion of it, is how it could be done. But that would be, you know, I just don't see it as being an open field, allowing anybody and everybody to come forward and say, yeah, I want that reviewed, I want that reviewed. You have to provide reasons, and there'd have to be an associated fee with that process, understanding that there's a cost of doing that.
Director of Planning.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to capture this as well. So if the PDC is asking for an application to be reviewed, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean reviewed for input? Would that delay a decision and bring it to council, or what is the scope of that review, and what do we do with the feedback?
And that's where we have to have the conversation on that sort of thing. It's just a way for, you know, if the Director of Planning was to decide to not proceed with the project, the applicant can ask council for a review, and
right.
that. If the Director of Planning was to decide, based upon the information they have, to approve a development permit, there's no vehicle for the public or anybody else who has a contrary opinion to ask for a review. And that's all I'm saying. Should there be? And I don't know if there should be. That's where best practices, should we look at that? Is there an opportunity for that? Are we at that day and age where we should be providing for that kind of review from the public as well, for that kind of request? They would have to provide reasons. They might have to pay a fee, and then council would have to consider the reasons, whether they are justified reasons to delay the issuance of the application or go through a further review.
Okay, so would you like are you asking for a staff report to outline the implications of a public review process on the delegated development permits to bring forward to the PDC?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Well, that's a good way to do it. If you would be okay to do it that way, at this point in time, ask for a request a staff report. I just didn't want to put extra weight on your plate right now, because I don't see it as a rush. And that's why I say if it goes to the environmental committee, it could be discussed in that context. And then staff could look at it in that context. But if it's possible to bring someone forward in the next 2 to 3 months and we look at it, I'd be happy.
Either way, by making this request, staff would have to spend some time preparing something to
Exactly. Yeah.
whether it's the planning and development.
Yeah.
So we are asking for a report from staff.
Yeah, before, yeah.
Implications
Okay.
of providing a public, providing the public an opportunity to request a review of a development permit.
Yeah, reconsideration or review. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor DeAndre, that's the last comment. Then I really want to vote on this and then move on.
Oh, it is a contentious issue, so it's better figure out now. My only concern of getting staff to provide feedback first is listening from staff without hearing the other side. I think Mayor Beamish is correct in a way. We hear from the other side, and based on what they say, now we get back to staff. And I think we have now staff analyzing what the proposal it is and how they think could articulate. I think we would be a better use of the time. That's my sense.
Well, ask staff to provide a report on how, so it's not like on how we could give the public an opportunity to request a review of a development permit in such a way that enables development to proceed in a timely manner, in a reasonable way, but still provides a bit of opportunity. Do you understand what I'm saying? So then it's not a is this good or bad? It's how do we do this in a way that works for developers as well as for the broader public.
Okay. But does it mean that we are not having a discussion like with the interest parties? I mean, or are we doing both?
We can do both after we get the report. We can take a look at that for the staff report. And the staff report will be public document.
Okay.
And we can look at that. Yeah. And as I say, I'm not aware of anything major on our horizon right now that would require us to fast track anything. And I don't want to put any extra on staff. I like to be best practices, and maybe current practices have moved forward since this bylaw was adopted in 2007.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, corporate officer, can you remind me what the motion that's on the table right now is? That to take it to the environmental committee? Sorry, I can't hear you again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, this computer is failing me today. The one that's on the table right now is to bring it to the environmental committee. So I would recommend that you move an amendment to clarify where you want it to go, and also include in that amendment the wording for actually what you want the staff report to do for you.
Okay, so Mayor Beamish, are you going to move an amendment?
No, but rather than delay this meeting, how about if we bring this back to the next meeting? In the meantime, I'll confer with the director of planning and the CAO and talk about how we could move something forward and have a resolution.
I think that would be better. I feel like this conversation's been a little bit uninformed a bit, and so I think if we could refine it, that would be excellent.
Probably be better to do that. Yeah. Okay. And Councilor DeAndre, we could share that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'd be prepared to withdraw my resolution.
Rescind it. Yeah. Okay. Corporate officer. Yeah. Can't hear you.
Can you now? Thank you. Well, if someone could please withdraw the motion currently on the table, and then we can refer the report to the next PDC meeting.
Yes, I withdraw.
Do we have to, is that it? Is that when we withdraw a motion? I'm not familiar with this process.
Councilor DeAndre could agree. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, we can move on now. Can we move? Do we have any further discussions on this report received? No. Okay.
I could say more, but I won't.
Let's.
I'm afraid to.
I think it's perfect. It's great. We want to review the bylaw. I just think Well,
the other issue that's come up that we haven't ever dealt with is it came up in the question of the George again. The George is stimulating lots of issues, but the other one was the issue of a bond on a project, and it's something we might want to consider going forward. And I'm not asking we have that debate today. And again, the environmental committee and reviewing these DPs can look at that, but that's something we should probably think about in the future too.
And I think reviewing all this is great. I think it just came at us today in a way that requires a bit more thought.
Yeah.
So that's good. Okay, so let's move on to report 3.3, over to the Director of Planning, and this is on the cannabis policy and survey results. So over to you, Director of Planning.
Thank you. So this report, the purpose of this report is to share results of the consultation and the community survey on the cannabis policy. At the time I wrote the report, I had only received one referral comment from the Gibsons and District Fire Department, and they had requested that all production facilities be accessible for fire inspections. Because as part of this policy, we have prohibited production, any new production facility would undergo a zoning amendment process, which would go to a referral to the fire department. And also we would get a building permit, which would also go to a referral to the fire department. So they would have a lot of opportunity to provide input before the building is built. Just today, I did receive some more comments. So I received comments from the school district. Their comments were that they would prefer a 300-meter buffer around the schools. They had concerns about odor from production facilities, and they would like to minimize signage towards minors. Vancouver Coastal Health reviewed the policy, and they supported this regulatory approach to protect public health, and they found that the distances, the 150-meter buffer, is an acceptable distance. And we also heard from SCREDO, the Sunshine Coast Regional Economic Development Organization, and they supported the policy as written, and they're pleased to see the distancing limitation between production facilities removed. So those are the comments received to date. We didn't hear from the RCMP or the Chamber of Commerce, but if I get anything from them, I can bring it forward to the council meeting. In terms of the survey, we collected 72 comments. And do you want me to go through the report? I guess.
Everyone had a chance to read the report?
Read the report.
Okay, so I'll skip that and leave it for the discussion. But ultimately, the policy is pretty much unchanged from what was previously presented. The only difference really is the 100-meter distance between cannabis production facilities has been taken out, mostly because if somebody is producing under a Health Canada license, the town is not privy to that information, and we can't measure a distance, which we found in the last zoning amendment we received. And also because the area is so small and the lots are so small, this would limit the area for this opportunity, for this development opportunity. So I guess that's a quick summary of the cannabis policy.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I get a motion to receive the report, please? Councillor Kroll? Anyone else want to second that? Councillor for receiving the report? Yes. Okay. Okay, so open for discussion. What do people think of the report before us? Councillor Kroll.
I thought it was, I really liked the way it was presented, and I thought it was sort of good to follow. I thought the interesting thing the one thing that sort of really popped in it was people's reaction to appearance of the retail businesses, consideration being given to, how an appearance of a place might be influenced or might have influence on people. So, but on the whole, I really, I thought it was well done, and like to commend staff for the effort and the presentation that has gone into it. And I'm certainly, prepared to move it as presented.
Okay. I saw some other hands up. Cliff, did you have your hand up earlier? Councillor DeAndretti?
Overall, I'm supportive of the report, even though I really struggle with the rationale of 100 meters and maximum number of stores, because we don't do this with liquor, which in my perception, it's even worse. So, but I'm willing to support, because we are walking like, you know, we don't understand where we are going. You know, we have a sense, and that's okay. It's uncharted territory. But what I'm more like interested in, what is the evaluation criteria? What kind of data we're gonna collect in the next 3 years, so we can really understand of consequences of our decisions.
Well, I don't know. Is that a question for Director of Planning?
Perhaps, yeah, an evaluation framework.
And it's probably going to be done at a provincial level. I'm sure there's going to be, I don't know if we're doing anything at a municipal level. You know, there'll be statistics, Health Canada, you know, all these, like as marijuana becomes legal across the country, there'll be Health Canada surveys, and, you know, but I don't know what we're doing here municipally.
I think if I may, maybe the question is, what's going to make us sustain the 100 meters or change 100 meters, for example, between stores? What's the rationale for that? I still don't understand. I know in a way that we made this decision because we don't know, but in 3 years, we will revise the policy. So what will be the framework? Yeah, that's what it says, right?
It says it will review this policy in 3 years, Director of Planning?
4.2.8.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, what kind of data are we collecting? What are going to be our basis? Because, I mean, right now, I don't really understand the rationale for 100. So that it's arguable, right? So.
Okay, so Director of Planning?
So the intent of that is to just reconsider it, see how it's going, see how many zoning amendment applications we get, look at which ones were denied, which ones were approved. If there were issues with the ones that are approved, we could bring that all back and reconsider the policy to change the criteria if needed. So it would really depend on what type of applications we get in order to do an analysis of how it's impacting the community.
Okay. Councillor Kroll?
And correct me if I'm wrong, the 100 meters was a direction that we in fact gave staff after we had going back fall of 2018, when we had numerous applications for retail outlets, and you know, we decided that we didn't want to see 3 on the same block. So the 100 meters was a directive, if I remember correctly, that we in fact gave to staff. So I'm not sure why you're questioning it now.
Yeah. I think my point is not questioning what is in the I know council, we collectively we accepted that and we are about to approve. What I'm saying is we did our best guess. My question is, what kind of evaluative criteria are we going to be collecting or understand? And the Director of Planning pointed some of them. It could be we haven't heard from neighbors, nobody complained, maybe we would change to 75, or I'm just saying there's no basis really in the criteria because it's an experimentation, right? So I'm just saying next time when the next council has to, if we have enough data that we understand where we were and what the criteria we were using, I think it makes things easier. That's what I'm pointing out. It was our decision was to a certain extent aleatory, right? I mean, collective opinion, but we don't have a basis. If we compare with liquor stores, there's no rationale why liquor stores yes and not cannabis. So I'm not saying I'm a favor or against. It's just how can we have an evaluation that we would make the best decision next time. It could be continue the way it is.
Okay, Mayor Beamish.
Yeah, actually, the analogy with liquor stores is not a good one because there actually is strong regulation on that. There's only one liquor store in town. Well, I guess, no, I guess it's true now, they've expanded, but they do limit them and their location. There's actually only 3 in town. There's one Lower Gibsons, there's the main store in Upper Gibsons, and there's one in the mall. But they actually do regulate the location of those. It's unlikely you could apply for another one today and get another liquor store in Gibsons because the liquor licensing branch approves those and go through a process. But on here, I think that's good, and I think the policy is good. The only question I have is that within the survey consultation, we had 45 or 55% of the people were in favor of limiting the number of retail outlets, and 54% of the people were in favor of limiting the number of protection facilities. But we're not doing that in any way here in the policy. And I still wouldn't mind to see a limit in the total number of facilities in town, and I'd be quite comfortable with the limit of 4, which I think was a higher limit that one of the higher limits that people were looking at, and for each type of facility, so that we don't dedicate all of our mixed-use commercial space or service commercial space is suddenly becoming the production of marijuana or the sale of marijuana. And that could something that could be reviewed also in 3 years' time as to whether that was a sensible decision.
Well, I think with regard to the retail sales or stores, the 100-meter distance, it limits the number of facilities you can have just in sheer size. I think
Not
that's
necessarily, but yeah, you'd have to take a look at if you have a facility every 100 meters and outside of the 150-meter boundary, it would be possible, I suspect. But to have more. But
I actually have a question for Director of Planning. Did we ask the people that participated in the survey what their like whether or not they were in the business or like how they were associated with the issue?
Yes, I believe we did. We said, question number 3 of the survey is, what is your primary relation to the local cannabis industry? And they could have, the options were cannabis retailer, cannabis grower, cannabis consumer, or they live, work in the town of Gibsons or other. So of the responses, let's see, 36% were cannabis consumers, and 54% were lived or worked in the town of Gibsons, and 9.7, so 10% were other.
Right. Okay. Ironically, my only concern with the approach we're taking is I don't really support the 150 meters from schools. I think that probably makes a lot of sense in other municipalities where the school isn't located right in the middle of the commercial core. My only concern here is that by limiting stores to be 150 meters away from the elementary school, what we're in fact potentially doing is pushing stores into less visible areas where if a retailer wanted to be a bad apple, it'd be a lot easier to sell to minors than it would be if they were located right in the mall where everybody could see them. And so I actually think it's a bit concerning to be pushing them away from our core area, but seeing as the majority of the respondents seem to really support greater distance, I probably won't dig my heels in on that, but I just wanted to make that comment in recognition that that's potentially what we're doing. I mean, you don't see many young kids standing in the parking lot in the mall looking for a boot to get someone to illegally buy them something from the liquor store, because there's just no way. You can't get away with that where we're located, which is a good thing. That's how it should be. My other concern is with regard to what Councillor DeAndrade brought up with regard to the inconsistency in how we're dealing with alcohol versus marijuana. Maybe not from the liquor board branch perspective of how far they distance each store, but the fact that we're allowing a liquor store within 150 meters of our school, but not cannabis, I find inconsistent, especially considering I was a bit of a troubled youth, and I remember what it was like back in those days, and I do think alcohol can be just as damaging, if not more, than marijuana, perhaps. So, you know, I find that aspect a bit, I'm not totally in support of it, but I'm also, like I said, not going to dig in my heels. I'm just putting that out there for others to consider. Councillor DeAndre.
That's why it was my first question. What's the evaluation criteria we're going to use? That was, to me, is the most important thing, right? So it could be number of calls, number of this. So if it is not number of complaints or the nature of complaints, and the director of planning also mentioned other things, I think it's just important to think so we can collect data, because I like to make decisions that we understand the core, right? We could find out in the future that, you know, 150 was terrible or it didn't matter, but I think it's important to back up with data. So that's where I was focused on how we're going to evaluate that with tangible data.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of going back to my earlier comments, I think, you know, what we have is a working document. It's a policy document. And when we came into office, we didn't have anything. We were like, you know, every application that came at us, we were like deer in the headlights. Like, what are we going to do with this one? And, you know, we were throwing TUPs at them. So, you know, I think we've got a good working document. We're going to find out where it works and where it doesn't. But, you know, I commend staff that, you know, in, you know, less than a year, you know, we've gotten this far. So, you know, certainly, you know, we need to keep a finger on the pulse and see what feedback we get from, you know, everyone involved. And, you know, I certainly agree with, you know, Councillor Ladwig. We've got the school saying they would like to see 300 meters. So, you know, 150 meters, 300 meters, you know, there needs to be some area of settlement, but I think visibility with a lot of these businesses is important. They police themselves. But I certainly commend staff that we have a working document that, you know, that we can go forward with, and it'll just be a case of monitoring it and see where it needs to be tweaked and adjusted. So kudos to staff.
I agree. That is a good way of putting it, for sure. It's a, especially considering we are going to be reviewing this again in 3 years, we can certainly, like you said, see how things are going at that point and what adjustments.
And if something comes up, it's subject to review. It doesn't have to be a 3-year, you know, cast in stone. It's a living, at this point, it's a living document.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I believe Councillor Kroll made a motion to receive the report, but we didn't second it. No one seconded it at that point. Mayor Beamish seconded it. Thank you. All in favor of receiving the report? Thank you. And we also have another recommendation that the Planning and Development Committee recommends that Council adopts the cannabis policy, I suppose, and moves it forward to Council for decision. Mayor Beamish, do you want to amend that motion? You had made a comment that you were concerned about the number, limiting the number of facilities.
I know that the distance is going to limit the number, but it's not going to limit the number of necessary cannabis production facilities. And I would hate to see our limited industrial area be overtaken by simply being a cannabis production facility. So I would like to recommend we limit the number of production facilities to 4 at this time, and just see how that affects. But the cannabis stores, I think they will be limited themselves by the distance. You're right. Yeah.
Councillor DeAndre.
One thing that came a lot in this report was about smell, and even for existing facilities. how can we have a pulse on smell? Because I think smell is huge, right? You want a facility that you don't smell anything. So I mean, and I also want to understand why, you know, why the other facility there's still lots of smell going on. At least I hear people say.
They're not
And
legal.
that would be my concern with the 4 facilities, right?
Councillor Kroll.
You know, I totally agree with the smell issue, because there are areas of town that, depending on whether you like it or not, it's very noticeable. But I think the smell is emanating from facilities that we haven't licensed.
Yeah.
And have no control over, or limited control, because, you know, as the director of planning mentioned, there's issues with the fire department. You know, a lot of these places we don't, you know, we know they exist because of the smell, and that's about where it ends. So, you know, going to the, you know, I agree with the mayor that, you know, giving up, you know, I don't know exactly what the employment statistics are for a, you know, a government licensed grow op, but you know, again, it's a whole gray area that we are, you know, don't have any say. So I'm all in favor of limiting production in the area. The other thing that needs, and I don't know, it's above our pay scale, is this whole thing with the vendors not, in a lot of cases, not having access to what is actually produced locally. You know, I hear a lot of complaints from the stores that are in existence that the quality of what they're selling is not as good as what you can still buy in a parking lot of a school, if you know who to buy it from. So you know, it's you know, it's what, it's a little over a year and a half that it's been legal. We're still dealing with areas that aren't legal. So again, it's a growing thing, but I think, you know, the more we have control on what's happening in our community, the better it is.
Yeah, I don't know how much I think that's going to be regulated by the province as far as them
Federally.
or federally, yeah.
Federal, yeah.
As far as accessing their product.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question for Director of Planning. Can the production facilities, what's the zone that we're proposing, that where they're saying service commercial business center? Is that,
Yeah, sure. So the production facilities, what this is saying is we'd look at the OCP land use designation area for service commercial. And it's basically the industrial area. And what we would do is, this policy says, if there's an application for a zoning amendment in that area, we would bring it forward. We would process it and consider it. So I just want to remind the planning committee that this is a policy to look at a zoning amendment application. So every single one of these would still come to PDC and go through the rezoning process for a final decision by council.
Okay, but sorry, just to clarify, are we saying the service commercial business center, is that the industrial area or not?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Beamish.
The question in terms of the smell, is that not something that's regulated then by the building code and the actual building of the facility? They have to have scrubbers and everything?
Yeah, so the Health Canada would regulate the type of building for the production facility, and they have building requirements for it and standards.
Yeah, which is why we smell things now, because there's nothing legal up there.
That's right.
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, it's not built to the commercial production standards.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so Mayor Beamish made a motion to, if I remember correctly.
I'd like to, for the purpose of at least its first 3 years, limit the production facilities to 4 under the policy.
Councillor Kroll seconds that. All in favor? I'm in favor too. Okay. From what I'm hearing, that sounds like the only amendment or change that is being recommended by this committee. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor DeAndrade?
Just a quick question. Just because I touched upon the smell and I understood, does it mean once we have a policy, we can go after the facility that has a very strong smell and is impacting people that have asthma and things like that?
Well, if I believe that they would complain to the bylaw officer and then there would be action taken to address the smell issue.
But perhaps if I can, the director of planning, I'm trying to understand. So because we don't have a policy, we cannot go and regulate them right now?
We do have a policy. So we do get complaints and we do follow up through bylaw enforcement for smell or noise or anything like that.
Okay, so made a motion to limit the number of production facilities to 4. That's passed. The next recommendation is that the Planning and Development Committee recommends the council adopts the cannabis policy as amended. Corporate officer, is that the right approach?
Well, you've made the other resolution or recommendation as a standalone, so I would just read this one as is, and they would both move forward.
Great. All right. So the Planning and Development Committee recommends that council adopts the cannabis policy as is. Someone want to make that motion? Okay, Mayor Beamish, seconded by Councillor Crowell. All in favor? Great. All right. So we're down to inquiries. It seems like there's a number of participants.
At this time, I'll ask anybody who's attending the meeting, if you want to use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of the screen, I'll turn your sound on so that council can hear your question.
Planning and Development Committee.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. So the Planning and Development Committee can hear your question. I see one here, so I'm just going to move them over.
Hi, folks. Suzanne Sanger here. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. First, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the staff report on the DPAs and the conversation. This is a conversation I've been waiting to hear at this table for a really long time, so I'm kind of excited about that. I guess the details of this conversation will come to the Environment and Climate Change Committee that will be struck shortly. I'm just curious about when that's going to happen. Do we have a timeline for this committee? It's been, I think, like 20 months or so since Mayor Beamish announced that when you were all first sworn in. So I'm curious, you know, I'm antsy to see that committee come forward and have this conversation at that table in full view of the public. So do we have a timeline?
As I mentioned, Councilor DeAndrade submitted a draft terms of reference. I've looked at them and I've passed them on to the CAO, and we will get together with Councilor DeAndrade and review them again before we bring them to council. And we need to also include the corporate officer. And one of the challenges we have is with any committee is staff support, because all committees require staff support. And you'll recall that we also promised a public art committee, and we started that process in November, and we're just now holding meetings with staff support on the telephone with us, sort of thing. So we're trying to find ways to do those things, but we are moving it forward. And thanks to Councilor DeAndrade, we have a solid draft to work with. Yeah. So I can't promise you it'll be 1 meeting away or 2 meetings away, but when it's ready to come forward, it will be on council agenda.
All right, well, we're impatiently waiting. Thank you.
Any other questions, corporate officer?
No, I don't see any.
All right, going once, going twice. All right. Okay, the next meeting for the Planning and Development Committee will be held on Tuesday, July 7th. It always says in the Town Hall Council Chambers at 3 p.m. and I'm always hopeful that in fact,
May happen.
who knows?
Well, I'm here. So
All right, well, motion to adjourn the meeting then. Councillor Kroll. Mayor Bemis, thank you. All in favor. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.